name's Bobbi Holmes. I am the USA Today Bestselling Author of the Paranormal Cozy Mystery Series, Haunting Danielle. I also write under the pen name Anna J. McIntyre. Now, before I move on with the topic of today's video, I do want to mention that I obviously have not received my microphone yet, my new one, and so excuse again the audio quality on this particular video. I also wanted to, just for information's sake, mention something about my backgrounds. I told you in a previous video that I'm using a green screen, but some of you might have wondered why I use this particular background in my very first video, and that is because I live in Lake Havasu, and that's kind of what our hillsides look like right now this time of year in the spring. So when I saw this image, it reminded me of home, so I decided to use it for my first video. Now in the next video, I use this background, and well, I use that one because I'm sheltered in place like many of us are, and I can't really go anywhere. It would be kind of nice to go to a mountain cabin, so I thought I would do it here. Today's background is in honor of J. Clifton Slater, who was mentioned in my previous video. He said something about how he was looking forward to going on a video with us in a beach condo, and so this is as close as we're going to get. So this is for today's video. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the topic today, which has to do with bitterness and snarky behavior and how that can adversely affect your writing career. Now, the first thing I want to remind you is that your fellow writers are not your competitors, not in the strict sense of the term. For instance, we are not selling refrigerators. If we were, then each household would buy probably one refrigerator, and they wouldn't buy another one for a long time. So we would be competitors if we were all selling refrigerators. But fortunately, we're not selling refrigerators. We are selling books. And very often, authors in your same genre can help you sell more books. You can help them sell more books. You can help each other. And so keep that in mind, that we are colleagues and we can help each other. And those that do help each other and work together tend to succeed the most. So my first warning about snarkiness and bitterness has to do with what I call revenge reviews. And that's when you have an issue with another fellow author, and so you leave a really nasty review on one of their books. And it is just not a nice thing to do, and it's really bad karma. And I do know of one case where it may have, I don't know for sure, but it could have possibly really impacted one author's career that I know of. This was back when I used to frequent the KDB forums over on Amazon. They have forums over there for the self-published authors. And in the early years, like 2011, 12, I used to go over there a lot. Well, there was this one author, and she was a good writer, and she was trying to build her career like the rest of us were. But she had a real issue with another writer in the group. And so she left a really nasty review for that particular writer. Well, she didn't think anybody would know that she was the one that had done it. But unfortunately for her, even though her review name wasn't attached to her profile that she was using in the forum, there were some clues. If you read through her previous reviews, you could kind of figure out who had written. It was pretty obvious because she had discussed some things like weeks earlier, something that she had bought for her children, and it showed up in the reviews, and some of it was just matched. And so not everybody figured it out, but a lot of people figured it out. They realized she was the one that did it, and she was called on it. She never said anything. She sort of backed away, and she didn't address it. She didn't try to defend herself. She just kept quiet on it. So that happened back there. And then a few years later, a number of writers from the group got together, and we created a private Facebook group for authors that wanted to take the business seriously. We wanted to help each other, and we didn't really want there was a lot of BS that happened over a lot of drama and silly stuff that happened on the other forum, and we kind of wanted to remove ourselves from that, and we wanted to seriously work on our publishing writing career. So when we invited people over to join us in this private group, we were careful not to pick people that were obvious troublemakers or like to hurt other people. We wanted to pick writers that show that they were really working on their career and they weren't out to be revengeful or spiteful. Well, one of the members suggested her as a possible member of the group. Well, some of us had witnessed what she had done over there. Not everybody was aware of it, and we, disclosed that, and so she was not invited over. And it wasn't like we were trying to be cliquey. We were just trying to avoid any of that bullshit nonsense of drama or backstabbing or anything like that. And so fast forward a few years later, a number of years later, well, many of the writers in our group have done very well by helping each other. I'm one of them that have benefited from the mutual help from the other writers in that group and the knowledge exchange. Well, I looked her up not too long ago, and unless she's writing under a brand new pen name and reinvented herself, her writing career sort of fizzled, and she's not really, her ranking's not terrific, she's not really doing anything anymore. So that's an instance where, now I don't know for sure if it hurt her, but it's one of those things, if you could turn back the clock, had she resisted the temptation of writing that review, and had she been invited to the group, and got to know these other people that I benefited from, you know, a little bit closer. I mean, even though she knew some of them back there, but it was a little bit of different exchange within the private group. You know, her career may have really taken off. I mean, maybe it wouldn't have, but I kind of wonder about that. So those are those things you don't really know how much it hurt you, because you can't go back in time. It's just one of those roads. You're going down a road, and you can turn right or you turn left, and you turn the wrong way, and everything changes for you. So that's the first one. Don't leave revenge reviews. It's not good karma. Now, let's see what the next one is. Okay, the next one has to do with blaming other people. Okay, when you're building your writing career, it's best not to blame everybody else for your failures. And let me explain what I mean. When I was looking at some of these different AuthorTube and YouTube channels, and they were discussing self-publishing, there was a lot of comments that were left on the different videos when somebody on the video would say, you can't really make any money in self-publishing, it's really hard. Well, there was one comment in one of the videos I watched, and this person was an author, and they agreed that it's really impossible to make a living at self-publishing. And they said they had been doing it for a number of years, and they barely scrape by, and they just don't do very well. Well, you know, that got me curious, because I want everybody to succeed, quite honestly. If people that are really trying, if they have good books, I really want them to do well. So I looked up this particular author, and immediately the covers, he had a lot of books, but the covers were really not very well branded. They kind of looked homemade. He had some real cover issues. Now, I have no idea if his books were wonderful or if they were horrible. But the very first impression that somebody got when they looked at his books was that of somebody that's just homemade covers and just playing around with it. So that's kind of he has put a barricade up just by those horrible covers. Now, because he is so busy blaming the industry, it's a tough industry, and he's not taking that attention and looking back at it himself, he's missing an opportunity to think, well, maybe I'm doing something wrong. Well, maybe let's start at my covers. Let's start at branding. You know, let's go from there and then see each step along the way that I'm messing up. So sometimes when you sit around and you blame everybody else, there's too many books out there being published, and Amazon keeps changing things, and blah, blah, blah. You can make all kinds of excuses, but that will often prevent you from turning around and looking at yourself and examining what you may be doing wrong. The next one has to do with burning bridges. Don't do it. And when I talk about burning bridges, I mean when somebody contacts you in the industry, and as you go along and as you get more books out there, people are going to contact you. It may be producers of audiobooks, it may be agents who specialize in self-published authors, cover designers, all kinds of people might be contacting you. And when they do, and you decide you don't want their services, try to be respectful and don't burn that bridge. Leave the door open, because down the way you may decide you need them. A good example is I know of people that have been contacted by audio producers and they didn't want them, but they said it so nicely, and later on they decided they didn't want to produce their own audiobooks, so they contacted them again, and they had left that door open. So leave the door open. Don't be snarky. Don't be cranky with them, and because you may need them another day. The next one on my list has to do with how you behave on social media. And we have heard the term, I'm sure you have, of authors misbehaving, and that's usually when there's some sort of a meltdown on the internet. It might be over at Twitter or on Instagram or Facebook or whatever, and everybody starts talking about that author, and maybe you think all publicity is good publicity, but that's not necessarily the case, because what that happens is that's sort of like the burning bridges I talked about a minute ago. because even though it may get you more exposure, you may need people along the way that you need their help or their expertise, and they're going to kind of shy away from you because you've just sort of made yourself very toxic. So think about how you behave on social media. Also, it even has to do with how political you get on your business site. There are some authors I know that have really gone over the top on their political posts on their author sites, not their personal sites, but their author sites, and it has hurt them a little bit. One author in particular I can think of, he posted a lot on there, and I guess he reported that his sales have really plummeted. So, you have to really be careful. It's fine to be passionate about things, but remember, this is a business, and so you need to really be careful how you behave on social media. Another thing to think about is, let's say you want to respond to a post, and let's say you normally behave really good on social media, you're polite, you treat it as a business, but a post comes in or a comment from one of your readers and it really pisses you off, and it's one of these comments that you really feel you need to respond to. Well, before you do, you need to really make sure if you have interpreted that correctly, because very often on text messages, we will read a text message and we will see one thing and somebody else will read it and they'll interpret it as meaning something else, or the person that sent it maybe meant it totally differently. Maybe they were just kidding around. You don't even know if a post is sarcastic or if it's serious. So before you respond negatively, especially to one of your customers' posts, get a second opinion from somebody else, and you may find out that you totally misinterpreted the post, or maybe you were a little overreacted and you'll just pass it by and let it go on. Because if you do respond and you respond negatively and snarky, then it may come back later and adversely affect you. Okay. Now the next one has to do with book reviews. It is pretty much known in this industry that book reviews are for the reader, they are not for the author. And so it's always advised not to go there. Do not respond to your book reviews. Although there are always cases where authors do, and I'm one of them that have done it before. But when I have responded, it has usually been the case when somebody has left a review, and they've obviously left a review on a book that's not that book. And one in particular, the reviewer wrote that they liked the book, but there was too much explicit sex in the story. Now, this particular book had no sex, not even explicit or otherwise or whatever. There was no sex in it. And so all I did was I just responded and I said, I believe you may have gotten this book confused with someone else because there's no sex scenes in this particular book. So that was a case. I was more or less doing it for the future reviewers, possible readers, so they would be aware that this was an inaccurate review for that reason. I wasn't questioning the reviewer's opinion on the book, just the fact that he was reviewing the wrong book. So if you do find yourself compelled to leave a comment to review, please do it respectfully and calmly, because you don't want to then, that throws you into that author's misbehaving category. This next one has to do with how you react to writers who are doing really well, authors who are doing really, really well with their book sales, but you think personally that they can't write at all, they're crappy writers. Okay, back when I was freelance writing, I belonged to a private writers forum that these different freelancers would log into, and we would discuss things about writing. Well, this was right around the time that Amanda Hawkins was making it really big. Her book sales were going crazy, she was making a ton of money, and she was really in the spotlight. Well, the conversation around our virtual water cooler back then had to do with Amanda Hawkins sometimes, and the other writers would talk about how she was such a crappy writer that they just didn't understand why she could have so many book sales, and they were just dishing her really bad. Now, personally, it wasn't that I was a wonderful person, I wasn't dishing her, but I have never read Amanda Hawkins' books. So I just kind of listened and read, or didn't really listen, I read the different posts about it, but they were all just kind of like complaining about her and talking about how she was a really crappy writer and just really dishing on her. Well, I remember thinking at the time, and I still think this way, that they were sort of missing the point, that what they needed to be doing was examining exactly why was she doing so well? What made her propel in sales? I mean, what was it that the readers were responding to? Because obviously whatever she was doing wrong wasn't hurting her sales. She was doing really terrific. So that was a case that sometimes when you want, it's one thing to be a reader and you're making book reviews and then you talk about the negative things and what you didn't like about the story, and there's a time and the place for that. But as a writer and an aspiring author, when you examine other books and how other authors have done, you need to do that not like out of bitterness or vindictiveness or maybe a little bit of jealousy, but more or less look at those things and what can you learn that can help you in your career. So with Amanda Hawkins' case, those authors, writers, should have really been looking at her and asked themselves, what is she doing right that we need to start doing? And it's the same thing for if you have a writer friend who writes wonderful and they put their books out there but they're a flop, then you need to look at them and say, well, what are they doing wrong? How that's the case when you're looking at what they're doing wrong and seeing how to help them propel themselves. So it's just how you look at these different writers out there. And sometimes as authors, we get a little wrapped up in our egos and we want to, dish somebody that we think, they're doing well, but we think they write like crud, so we, have to be snarky. And you know what? That's a waste of our time and a waste of our energy. Don't be snarky about it. Look at those authors and ask yourself, what are they doing right? And then try to do it. So those are just some of the things that is probably best to avoid if you can. Self-publishing is difficult enough. You don't need to make it harder for yourself. And there is one other thing that I would like to mention, and that has to do with when you become a successful author. If you become a successful author and suddenly you are making like, oh gosh, I don't know, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 a month, you're really proud of yourself, and that's a good thing. I mean, we're proud of you when you're doing that. But when you're sharing this information with your fellow authors, especially those writers you've established relationships with, and some of those writers are not doing that well, they still haven't even made their first $1,000 yet, and yet you're really boastful and everything. Are you telling them this because you're trying to inspire them and show them what is possible? Or are you just going like, yeah, I'm really cool and you're a loser? I mean, which way is it? You need to ask yourself, why are you telling them this, and why are you sharing, and what is your goal for them? Do you want to help them along? So that is something important to think about, because the reason I say this, I have seen this happen before, where an author will do really well, and then they'll have a friend that they've been moving along in the industry with, and this particular friend is not doing as well. The friend may have some wonderful books, but they just have not achieved the financial success that their fellow author has. And so, but this one is boasting and almost like rubbing salt in the wound. I mean, just like, yeah, look how great I'm doing, and trying to almost make the other one feel kind of bad. And so what's happened is, it doesn't just push that author that's not doing well away from their friend, it is also pushing them away from self-publishing and writing, because they're starting now to feel really insecure about themselves, and maybe they're just not any good at this, and maybe they need to move on. And I see that is very sad, and I hate to see that happen. I mean, obviously not every book is going to make a success. I mean, we will probably another day have a discussion about, what makes a book a success in self-publishing when you do everything right. But for this particular writer that I'm thinking of, her books are really good. So I don't like to see that. So be a little bit more careful when you do share your success, and do it in a way to try to help other people, because we can all succeed. This is not a business that if you succeed more, it's necessary for that person over there to be a failure for you to be successful. It doesn't really work that way. You can both be successful and have really good careers. So that's my discussion for today. And if you have any comments, please leave them down below. And hopefully I will have my microphone the next time and I won't sound so strange, but maybe I will. I have a squeaky voice anyway, I guess. That's what I've learned. And please be careful. For those of you sheltered in place, hang in there. And for those of you that have to be out, like my daughter-in-law, she's in the medical profession and it worries me, and I just want her to stay safe, and I want all of you out there to stay safe. And hopefully we will get through this fairly shortly and be able to go on with our lives again. But in the meantime, for the writers out there, this is an opportunity for you to get some good writing done. So I want you to get with it, get writing, and write on. Bye.